Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Thursday, the 3rd of April, and you are watching episode 165 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Minor Parties, Major Hope, is my guest and member for the Queensland Libertarian Party Senate team, Lachlan Lade. Lachlan is from Proserpine farming family and has actively engaged in politics since joining the LNP at the age of 16. He initially studied biotechnology at the University of Queensland, but soon opted out for a career in business, sales, and the new economy. Through his experience using innovative blockchain systems, Lachlan identified barriers and opportunities to use the technology. He is an entrepreneur, founding and operating his own successful blockchain cybersecurity company, serving clients in Australia and internationally. Lachlan is eager to share his ideas and experience with other young people and believes they need to get involved in politics and the discussions about important issues impacting on their future. Welcome, Lachlan.
Thank you, Bill. That was quite a thorough introduction. Great to be here.
I'll just put a note out there. You were to be accompanied by Jim Wilmot, the lead for the Senate team. Unfortunately, he's come down with a bit of a bug. But I'll also point out that both you and he will be making a trip up to the north starting next week, visiting Cairns and Townsville, I believe. So if you'd like to give us a bit of background on yourself, maybe some of your misspent youth, although you haven't used much of it up yet, and why get involved in politics at the age of 16 when most people are sort of, haven't got a clue what they want to do, let alone be involved in politics. So just give us a bit of an idea of that journey.
Yeah, thank you for sure. So you're right. Like I did join young, not that I had any idea what I was getting myself into. I just knew that there was this member of parliament who had a lot of charisma that would come to my school, interact with us. And as far as I knew, he was listening to people and helping them fix problems. And that just really connected with me. And so he was,
That wouldn't have
frankly,
been Jason Costigan, would it?
it was actually.
I
So
know Jason fairly well. Yeah.
yeah, Jason was lovely. And he took me out with him for a bit of work experience through Hamilton and the region, so I got to actually experience what that was like. And look, I just would love to take on opportunities. I did a number of competitions throughout Australia, like the Brisbane Brain Bee, and a number of extracurricular activities like the Brisbane Band or the Proserpine Band. And because all of that helps you grow, right? And that's what I saw here as well. And it gave me the opportunity to go to national and state conventions and really, I guess, make some connections like with George Christensen, who I've come to know quite well now. But politics is complicated, and we all, we commonly say when you're young, well, there's a quote for it, right? The Winston Churchill quote. If when you're young, you believe in socialism, and as you get older, you start to mature, you pay tax returns, and you become more of a conservative. And if you don't become a conservative, it's probably because you don't have a brain.
Mm.
So, the path that I've been on has been, I guess, a lot of self-development to realize where we've come from as a nation to arrive here, and the principles and the political ideology that helped us build the society that we know to arrive here. So it took me many years to really develop a solid political understanding of all the different aspects: conservatism, socialism, fascism, communism, libertarianism, which I am now most proudly affiliated with. And all of that was really to do what we are doing now. It is to engage the local community. It is to create awareness about the issues that people are struggling with and try and drive change. And that's what I've particularly enjoyed the most on this campaign with Jim Wilmot. We've been out there protesting the solar and wind farms they've been putting in regional communities. We've been out there protesting the Greens. We've been doing fuel excise stunts to try and, show people what it would be like if they voted for the Libertarians and didn't have to pay fuel tax. A lot of bottom-up politics where I'm out there with the everyday people who I'm no different from, driving the same roads, eating the same food, and yeah, all trying to move the dial in the right direction, which is, to bring back a bit of common sense.
I
because I
suppose
think,
one of the things also being, well, mentored a little bit, I suppose, to a degree, or influenced a little bit by Jason, you would have been pretty impressed with his iron trap memory. Like, I
the
have never
name.
met anyone who had the recall that he had, that where he could, reflect on an event. He could tell you the time of day, what day of the week it was, where, when, and everything of something that happened. Like,
He was a storyteller. Yep.
yeah, he's
Yep.
definitely a storyteller, and I think that's a good thing to have in politics. I mean, as much as people might, berate it or that, a good storyteller is fine when you're doing politics, because you've got to engage with people.
Yep.
So that's always very important. Um, in regards to the early days in joining the
Hmm.
LMP, um, did you get some idea of the processes that were going on, from branch meetings and things like that, and compare it to other areas of politics that you might have got started at least having a look at after you were a little bit disenfranchised by the LNP?
Yeah, well, when I joined the Liberals, right? So I did for a little time run the branch up here in Kalen, Bloomsbury, which is where I was. I was secretary for that branch, so I did learn that process. Going down to national and state conventions and voting at those functions with the young LNP as well. So I got to see, I guess, quite a bit of the internal workings. But yeah, as you just said, right, I didn't find myself able to connect too well with a lot of the young liberals because they all wanted more regulation and control when it came to certain things. And I thought I even got up once in Brisbane and I spoke the first time I ever spoke at one of these events and I said, guys, aren't we going in the wrong direction here, trying to regulate these aspects? We are the party of small governments, less regulation. Um, that was funny. And that was my first experience of where there was a bit of an alignment in political ideas. And then obviously during the pandemic, when they just cast aside everything they were supposed to stand for, was when I left them entirely because the one opportunity that they had to stand for something which would have prevented so much damage to our nation, well, they failed because that was the opportunity. And since then, I really don't think too highly of the Liberals.
Yeah, I think that sort of alienated a lot of people. A lot of people got cancelled, of course, as well.
Yeah, so did
Um,
I.
but one of the other things that I found that was sort of disappointing too was
Mm,
the we already had a pandemic plan. I mean,
mm,
Abbott. I remember back in. I remember going back. This is going back to my Air Force days.
yep.
There used to be a meeting, and there was a series of meetings, all the time. I was in defence there then, and this is going back to the 90s, and we actually had a disaster management plan. And every 5 years, different people met, from all walks of, authority, from defence to the public service, the politicians and that. And they went over a lot of things in regards to, at that time, it happened to be bushfires. We were just
Hmm.
getting annihilated by bushfires, in the 90s, and there was a couple of real bad ones. So that was one focus. There was a bit of focus on floods. And
Yep.
I presume other people were dealing with the health, and biology type problems.
Hmm.
But there was always this build-up of information. So if had something happened, they would have a plan. And my understanding that Abbott did, in his term of government, or actually when he was health minister, he started getting it all together for situations where if we did have a pandemic, and we had a pandemic plan, but that was the first thing to be jettisoned, which, it makes a mockery of what you stand for. And the
It
other thing
does.
that I think that really griped me is because I'm very passionate about the Constitution and the
Hmm.
separation of responsibilities between the state and the federal government.
Yep.
And what happened? They completely abandoned that on the day one. They convened the national cabinet. The premier
Yes.
and the prime minister started to run this whole situation.
Yep.
The, the ministers of the country of the federal government were sidelined. They were actually sidelined while the Prime Minister and the Premiers kept making all these arrangements.
Mm,
And the Prime Minister just wrote them a big fat check, blank check, do what you like. So there was never any consequences for what they did financially for the state. If they didn't have
correct.
that blank check, I think things might have been a little bit different. So they might have been a little bit
Absolutely.
more constrained in what they did to their economy if someone else wasn't picking up the bill. So I suppose that tops it off. But I mean, as being disaffected from the Liberal Party, that goes back to when Abbott was stabbed by Turnbull. So uh,
Yep.
they'll never get my first preference anyway.
And look, it showed to me very clearly because everybody around the world, no matter what government it was, left or right, was lockstep in locking down their country and following the same path. And to me, yeah, Liberal, Labor, they're all statists. They all want to control your life, tell you how to live. And that's the key difference I came to realize. It's not left versus right. It's more freedom versus control. It's those who want to let you make your own decisions versus those who want to make the decisions for you. And I think that's the key message a lot of people are starting to realize where, Australia, we're a modern civilized society. We should be able to make our own decisions as individuals as long as we're not harming other people. And
Well,
that's core.
as a nation, we should be able to make our own decision as well. The
Spot on.
problem was because everyone was doing the same thing, it gave it a lot of people the sense and obviously fed the conspiracy theories that
Hmm.
someone outside the elected bodies were making these decisions for the elected people of all the various countries. And I mean, capitulating to WHO, the UN,
Hmm.
and all those sort of things,
Hmm.
it just makes a mockery of, oh, we're a sovereign country, but we're signed up to all these other things. So
Yeah.
I think that has caused a lot of things. But coming into this election, it also provides the Libertarian Party and others to be stood up in front and say we're a clear difference. We do actually hold these values, which are supposed to be held by others, but they don't show any um, principles in keeping them.
Exactly. That's the biggest clear difference you'll find with the libertarians. We will never ever vote to take away your civil liberties or ever put in place another tax. Uh, that is our foundation, right? And we want to see Australia sovereign truly. We do not want to be controlled by the WHO or have commitments to the WHO or the UN, such as the refugee intake. We are our own nation, our own people, and we can only we Australians can make our own decisions for our nation. We know what we need. And that's, yeah, that's foundational to us as well.
I think it also is a bit of a problem when the leaders of our country, and it doesn't matter if they're Liberal or Labor, whoever's in at the time,
Mm.
want to be seen as rushing in and being signatories to these international agreements. I mean, like say, we're a sovereign country. All right, we can take notice of them in regards to their advice or what's going on. But we don't have to sit there and sign a piece of paper and say, no, we're going to completely abide for that. And not only that, we're going to hand this regulation or treaty or agreement over to our bureaucrats and they can create legislation for us to implement on the people of Australia.
Yeah, and that was the craziest thing we did. I mean, telling people when they're walking around a shopping center to keep a mask on, but when they sit down to eat, they can take that off. I mean, in year 9, my science teacher was explaining to me when someone farts in the corner of the classroom, those particles go to every part of the classroom. You're going to be breathing it in no matter where you are. I mean, it was just utter rot, complete lack of common sense. And we know officially, the 6 meter, the 6 foot spacing rule that was completely made up. No science behind it. This is why we do not want unelected bureaucrats making decisions for ourselves. Um, yeah, that was a crazy time, and that we really do need to have accountability for that period. It won't be forgotten. There's still a lot of people suffering from it.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of people who were cancelled at the time and still haven't got their original jobs back or
Yep.
positions and things like that. So, um, but if we just move on to the Libertarian Party now, the Libertarians actually were the Liberal Democrats
Yes.
prior. Now, I've done interviews going back well, probably 3 years ago and 4 years ago
Hmm.
with Tim Quilty. Tim Quilty was the member of the uh, Legislative Council in Victoria for the northern areas.
Yep.
Uh, now, at that time, I I think the Liberal Democrats only had members in the upper house, and that's quite common for small parties. Is they do get a chance where you've got an upper house at the state level, because it's simply a quota system,
Yep.
and if there's, I think in most instances, I think New South Wales has got about 45 members in the upper house. So they have one time they'll have 23 members, one time they'll have 22 members elected. Uh, the quotas, you only need to get about 4% to
Hmm.
get yourself over the line. So people like the shooters and fishers, um, the Libertarians, of course, you've got John Ruddock down there,
Yep.
and other small parties, can get a Guernsey, and probably the Animal Justice and all those
Hmm.
people have
Hmm.
got a chance to get a Guernsey. Getting a legislative assembly seat where you have to win an electorate is much more difficult. But the interesting thing about having an upper house, at least you get a foot in the door. You might and because there's basically they're all 4 year terms now in the state. So if you get one member in at one election and another in the next election, well, you got two.
Hmm.
So and the way it's going in the upper houses, the crossbench has got a bit of leverage, you could say. So you do get a bit of profile there.
That's
Now,
right.
now in Queensland, you haven't got that luxury. So it's to get that initial foot in the door is
More
hard
challenging.
because
Mm.
A, you have to do it in the assembly, so you have to win an electorate,
Yep.
and that's fairly difficult for minors, unless you play a good game with your pre selections and things like that, and you're wheeling and dealing with your preferences. But there is some chance in some electorates. So, do you see a need to sort of for at least one of the minor parties to grow to that 15 sort of percent level of the votes, so it has enough leverage to make sure it captures all the flow down of the minors that give it a chance when it comes to the final getting into the top two for preferences and getting the preferences of one of the major parties. Because I see the big stumbling block at the moment is the minors eat up so much of the vote divided up. They're
Hmm.
hard pressed to get into that position where they can get that second slot from the few preferences that are eliminated beforehand.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great question. So, absolutely, what the Libertarians want to be is essentially the right side, what the Greens are to Labor. We want to be on the right, that form of accountability to the Liberal Party. We want to be able to grab the Liberals by the balls and pull them back to the right side of politics. Pull
Back
them
to the
back to their
core values.
principles. Exactly. And unfortunately, the other minor parties have not been doing the groundwork that's required to achieve that. Why is it the Greens have actually grown so substantially? They have what are called branches all throughout the different electorates of the states. Okay. Now, that's a group of people, which I was running back with the Liberals in the Kalen Bloomsbury, that come together for their electorate to bring the issues that the community is facing, to find the candidates that are going to run in the community, to campaign for them, to support them, volunteer for them. That's what we have been predominantly focused on because that's where we'll make the difference. So throughout the country now, we've got 33 branches set up that are functioning, and I think that's where we're going to make the difference. It's again that bottom-up politics. It's the grassroots movement. And, once I left the Liberals, right, I actually volunteered with UAP in 2022. I was just looking for options, but
Yeah.
what was actually really inspiring, right? So I was down in Salisbury, down in Brisbane, where I was living at the time, and there was probably 13, 15 volunteers that were coming around regularly. It was really quite inspiring. But what was crazy is me at the age of, I was around 25, 24. I had the most political experience out of everybody in that group, and I was the youngest guy there, you know, which that was not the position I wanted to be in. I couldn't believe how grassroots it was. It was really unfortunate that that whole thing just disappeared and ended after the election. And so I really became politically homeless for a few years until the Libertarians reached out to me. And thankfully, as as we're saying now, they were building exactly what I see that we need. We've got to grow that right side, that minor right party, which I have no doubt it will be the Libertarians now, that can keep the Liberals pulled back to their core values. That is our goal.
I think you've gone through probably a similar sort of thing that most people who were disaffected from the Liberals after Abbott was stabbed,
Mm,
they went off in search of something
mm,
uh, to find a home. And I suppose in the initial part, there was Corey Bernardi, who was
yeah.
seen to be a bit of a saviour sort of for the Conservative, actually, which if it had have stayed and sort of what that, it would have been the equivalent of what you're talking about.
Hmm.
Now, the interesting part about Corey Bernardi, he managed to get his party up to 25,000 members. And then what he says, after we got to that number, we're not telling you how many people we got, because that was one of his core things. He'll talk about getting membership numbers and then telling people how it's climbing and stuff like that. But when it got to 25,000, it stopped. He said it was going to stop, and it did stop. He didn't keep going on about it. So now he has a very strong membership base who are basically disaffected and experienced Liberal people who want to do something, right? Who want to be engaged in the whole process.
Yep.
Now, we had uh, a person up here who ran as an independent in about 2016. He organised a meeting at the Flying Yacht Club in Cairns.
Yep.
Now, this is 2017. Now, there would have been 400 people there, at
Mm,
least. Now, everyone who walked in the door put $50 on the table minimum as a donation. And there was a lot of people who put a lot more. Now,
mm,
Corey didn't come up. He sent someone up. I can't remember. I think his surname was Green, but he came from Brisbane. He sort of gave us a big spiel. Anyway, I stood up at the end of the meeting. I said, well, we've got about 400 people here. Why don't we form a branch now? Because it would be the biggest political force in Cairns. Because regardless of Liberals and the Labor Party being long time established, they might have about 60 really active members, sort of, and that's about it. But you had the basis of 400 people, passionate right now, and it basically told us, no, we're not establishing branches.
yeah, no, that's a failure. I mean, same thing as One
But the
Nation.
thing is, but here's the thing, and it's the
Yeah,
same reason, and Pauline doesn't either,
yeah, exactly.
because they feel they'll lose control.
No. Well, but
And
that's not going to be sustainable because all politicians are temporary. What's going to happen when Pauline retires, maybe at the end of her term? Her personality is a lot of what drives that party. It's a lot of what people know. And and then I struggle, and as well, that particular leader may not be the right type of leader for everybody to follow. That's why I prefer a principled approach where everybody's valued, everybody can provide feedback, everybody can help out. I mean, I volunteered with One Nation as well, but I quickly realized I was unfortunately
there
more
was
just
plenty
a
of people who did
number.
that too.
Yeah. Yeah, there was nothing I could do to really help out there. So I was just politically homeless. I was doing videos online, trying to create awareness, push back against the referendum, the voice. And yeah, that's how I became known with the Libertarians.
I think the Libertarians are doing the right thing because you definitely need a membership base you need a branch base that's working all the time between elections, not just becoming
Yes.
puts. And the thing is, not only that, they start getting a lot of knowledge about each other and the community to find good candidates. Now, what happens? Well, I found up here in Cairns over the last 12 years that I've been up here is the minor parties like One Nation and Uncle Clive's Party and things like that, they really do dish up a dog's breakfast of candidates, both state elections and that. I mean, I think there's been a couple of One Nation candidates who have knocked out in the first couple of weeks because they've been found out to been doing things online that people shouldn't be doing and sort of just not visible for anything. And there's others people who are just, well, they've got no profile and they've got no charisma and that, and they've got no presence and they've had no record of being engaged. I mean, I think we've got the situation now up here in Cairns. The member for the LNP has zero profile before this. His job before this was a paramedic, very noble profession, but I've never seen a letter to the editor on a political statement, never heard anything from him on anything political before this, yet he's now the candidate for the LNP, but we know nothing of his real background and his true character as far as what he wants to be as a politician and representative of us, but we know that he can nod his head. We know he can nod his head when someone from the south comes up and does a speak.
Yeah. Well, when I came up to Townsville, Cairns, the Atherton Tablelands last year, and I was actually, able to meet with quite a few businesses. The people are looking for another option. Look, they vote for these minor parties, but they just haven't seen anything happen these last, frankly, couple of decades. It's just been a lot of noise, but no actual substantial changes. And I do believe that is because no one's been actually doing the groundwork like we're trying to do. I mean, why are the Greens such a potent force in Australian politics? Yeah, they've been manipulating the youth with lovely marketing. We call them watermelons, right? Green on the outside, red on the inside, communists. But it's because they've been building the branches. It's because they've been doing the grassroots work. And people think that that's a principled party. They think, oh, these people are listening to me. They're engaging with me. They're out here with me, fighting with me, like we have been in the communities. Because, you've got to lead by example. And that's what I really see from Jim Wilmot. For me, he's setting a terrific example. He's been driving thousands of kilometers across this state. And just recently, 2 days ago, I drove up from Brisbane, right? 13 hours back up to Proserpine. And the roads, the experiences that you get by just getting out there and going through what the communities go through gives you a different perspective. I mean, I'm pretty pissed off at the condition of these roads. Got another crack in my windscreen today, and the rains. It's going to be months, if not a couple of years before they fix it all. It's absolutely atrocious. But you've got to get out there to realize what it's really like.
I think the other amazing thing is too, were you down in Brisbane for Alfred?
Alfred? Oh, the cyclone. No, I was up on the farm.
Oh, you're up at the farm.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's really interesting in regards to the coverage for Alfred, how it started a few days before and how people didn't have to go to work, for the 2 days, might even be in some cases 3 days before it actually crossed. I mean, the other thing is, for God's sake, anyone who's taken, this is a note to everyone. If you're taking any notice of the Met Bureau in regards to cyclones and things like that, just go over to, just have a bit of a look at the United States Navy, the Typhoon Center, and have a look at the data coming through that. And it has a much more balanced perspective. I mean, Alfred was on a 12-hour watch, basically. What that means is it's not posing any real problems where it is at speed and location and that. So we're only going to update you every 12 hours. Now, if the intensity picks up or its course changes, then they'll step up that watch rate. They'll give you just the basics. Just it's wind speed at the center. It's gusting. It's continuous wind. The direction it's taking, the speed that it's moving at, and things like that. No overly drama,
Hmm.
So it gives you something really clear. I mean, but when you're talking about weather reports and that possible category 3 and things like this, and it never was.
I
It
know
was
it
never a real
was.
problem, but it got all that attention. And the other thing is, we've heard about what they're going to, how much they're expected to have to spend in Brisbane in regards to fixing up after uh, Alfred.
Yep.
But up here, we've still got our two main roads knocked out, one to the across the Coranda Range and the other one, the Cook Highway up to Mosman and Port Douglas. It's still alternative one-way traffic because the roads are still cutting, only managed to get one lane across. So, and that's 15, 16 months later. And really, that's
Yeah,
your
really?
attitude towards,
Yeah. It's
so.
like, look, I better attribute it to I think it's Katter who says, right, the money truck, it leaves Brisbane, and as it's driving up the coast, all the money's falling off, and by the time it gets up here, it's empty.
Yeah, but the truck carrying the money out down there is pretty full in the first place.
Yeah, they strap it on tight.
Like people don't understand this. Central and North Queensland actually produce 70 to 75% of Queensland's export wealth. It's not trivial between agriculture and mining. Uh, that's the basis of your export dollars. That's really your income for the state. And the other big thing that people don't look at is how many people in Brisbane actually earn their money off the backs of people who worked here. Like all those executives who
Hmm.
sit down in Brisbane who own the mining companies, or even if they're just small ones or whatever, their money that they're drawing come from the wealth of central Queensland. All the fly in, fly out, there's more fly in, fly out miners in Brisbane than there are miners in actual
Mm.
central and North Queensland. Like some suburbs of Brisbane, if you go through the or SA4 areas and things like that, they've got more miners there than we have in central Queensland. So
Mm.
there's plenty of people earning a pay packet from central and North Queensland.
Undeniably. Yep. So,
Now, just moving on to policies and that, how are we going to set the difference going into this election um, for the Libertarians versus the rest? And also, roughly how many candidates in how many seats in the House of Representatives will you have as well?
mhm. All right. So, how do we set the difference, right? Look, we're at a cost of government crisis. No half measures when it comes to trying to solve that, right? For example, the fuel excise tax. That has to be abolished. First of all, it's double taxation. We're already taxed with GST. But secondly, fuel excise is supposed to be going into our highways, our 2 out of 5 safety rating highways, which is the Bruce Highway right now, right? Over the last 10 years, there's been about $170 billion collected in fuel excise tax. Only 45 billion of that has actually gone back into the roads. Where's the rest of it gone? We don't have any accountability because it goes into what's called consolidated revenue. And that's the same with tobacco tax and alcohol tax. There's no accountability where this money goes. It's essentially a slush fund for the politicians. So, you know, we've got to get the libertarians in there because the liberals just want to half the fuel tax and pause it for 12 and do that only for 12 months. And then what? Are we back at square one? The same can be said for immigration. He's talking about a 25% reduction for only 2 years. And then what? I mean, it's already 25% does not even take us back to a sensible level of what it was before, or go back a couple of decades. You know, the libertarians want no more than 100K net migration per year. We've got to get things back into perspective and we've got to allow public services to catch up in the infrastructure. So no half measures when it comes to helping the people, and not temporary measures either. I mean, if you're just pausing fuel excise, you're just reducing immigration. Well, fuel excise, right? You're just going to port half that for 12 months. It's no different to when Stephen Miles in Brisbane is giving out 50-cent public transport fares. It's just buying votes for a short period of time. So those are, some quick, brief examples where there has to be some accountability. There has to be some real change in the government, and some people who are probably experiencing what it's like and not just living in Canberra and flying everywhere. But when it comes to our members, you've got Jim Wilmot, the lead Senate candidate. You've got myself, the second Senate candidate. And then there is Gary down in McPherson on the Gold Coast. We've got Charlie in East Brisbane, and there should be a couple more. But the focus really is in the Senate, because that's where we can stop some of the crazy legislation coming through. That's where we can stop more taxes. And so a lot of our resources are being spent on the Senate race.
I think there's also a bit of an issue. I mean, if you go to the Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
the federal government only was allowed to basically have excise and tariffs as a means to raise revenue. It had a couple of other things, but also it only had a few things that it had to look after. It didn't look after education. It didn't look after health. It didn't look after law and order. It didn't look after babysitting your snot boxes. It didn't look after childcare and all this sort of stuff.
Nope.
It has had a very few core functions to deliver. And it was basically worked out that that could be done with excise and tariffs and a couple of income tax, sales tax belong to the states. So the states had the greatest revenue raising powers.
Yep.
Now, that changed in World War II because the threat was there that we could have,
we had to pay for the war. Yeah.
We had to pay for the war. So the states gave up income tax and let it be centralised.
Yep.
Now, I don't mind that as a principle, but the whole point is they should be, now that the war's over, they should be handing that money directly back to the states, no strings attached.
Yeah.
And they don't.
Yeah.
So I think there's a problem there, and we really need to go back into the nitty-gritty of the Constitution and make sure, if you want to save money, right, just separate what the Commonwealth's supposed to do and what the state's supposed to do, and don't duplicate.
Yeah, spot on.
Don't need Feds don't need a health department. No, they don't need an education department.
That's the one. The Federal Department of Education that sets the curriculum for all the states. That is dangerous.
It sets the pathway to failure.
Exactly. It removes the competition of the states. It creates the status quo. It stagnates our people. It stagnates learning, right? That needs to go. Doesn't employ a single teacher. Let education return to the states, to the schools, to the families, right? You're spot on. The federal government should be taking care of foreign relations, the border, the military. It should not be involved in all these other aspects of our lives. That's where we're becoming more and more centralized. See, libertarians want to break that centralization and put the decisions back in the states as it should have been, as it originally was designed. So yeah, with you 100%.
And really, it's such a simple proposition.
I agree.
All we're doing, we're not coming up with anything, extraordinary or irrational or that. We're just going back to the basics of the Constitution.
Restore traditional Australia.
And the other thing is, Section 100. We've got to wake up. It's specifically there to say that the states have control of water. This bullgust of what they're doing to the Murray-Darling Basin and the Commonwealth through its environmental control, deciding that 90% of the water that goes into a river has to go out the river through the mouth, and it's crazy. And that's not what the Commonwealth was there to do anyway. That's not their job. We've got to get the states back to a position where they are actually doing what they're supposed to do.
That's
and
right.
The Commonwealth is doing what they. But I suppose it's really, you can't completely blame the states, because with the 90 to 95% of the revenue by the Commonwealth, who have got all the purse strings, they've coerced the states into saying, well, if you adopt our education plan and all this, we'll give you this
Yep.
bucket of money. If
Yep.
you sign up to this agreement, like closing the gap, we'll give you this bucket of money. So it's the coerciveness of the purse that is the problem.
You're right. You're right. So one solution here, one thing that we help move the dial in the right direction, if we can get enough common sense senators who realize, the path that we're going down is not how the path that Australia was designed for. Okay, we have income tax collected by the federal government now, but as you were saying, how they were supposed to previously make money, it was with excise and tariffs. Well, we also have GST now. GST should be collected and kept by the states that are generating it. And we can change that if we get enough senators into power, into the enough common sense senators. That would get rid of the beggar states, because right now they're collecting the revenue, giving it to the federal government, then the federal government's deciding who gets it. Well, they're bailing out, or at least aiding, Melbourne and Tasmania, which don't have the GST collections that, say, WA or Queensland has. So that's one aspect that we could make a big difference on pretty quickly, with getting just a few more good senators in there.
The other thing too is the way and this is I think this is always a problem. The politicians tend to come up with these independent bodies.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like we've got anything to do with it, you gutless people.
Yeah.
But that's all it is. They just lack of intestinal fortitude. So we dump it out onto this independent body. It makes the decision and we just go along with it. But like the Commonwealth Grants Commission does the GST split. But it's the same thing by handing out someone else's GST to places like Tasmania and South Australia in particular. I mean, yes, Victoria's become a basket case of late, but it wasn't before. But Tasmania and South Australia always have been. They've always been dependent on other states to prop them up in regards to some sort of funding, or the federal government. I mean, South Australia got the car industry basically. And when the car industry packed up, what did the governments do? The federal government moved all the shipbuilding out of Newcastle and out of Williamstown dockyards into South Australia to bolster their economy. It's allowed Tasmania, because Tasmania gets $1.78, or I think it's over $1.80 now, for their return of the GST. It allowed them to sort of just about cancel every bit of industrialisation. They closed every bit of mining. They've effectively closed most of their logging down. They knocked back a big a new generation paper mill, and they're basically trying to now close down the salmon industry and everything. So, and it's to a stage where 70% of all people employed in Tasmania now are either employed directly by the state, federal, or local government, or are contracted to those people for some aspect.
Yep.
Now, you can't sustain a country or a state or that if 70% of your working people are government dependent.
Absolutely not. We the taxpayer are carrying this burden. I cannot afford to pay 1 in 5 Australians working in the government, because that's what it's currently at. 27.5% of our GDP is from government spending. The Soviet Union, the communism, that was their GDP from government spending was about 50%. So we're over halfway on that path. And you're talking about the industrial, the manufacturing and the industries that are leaving. It's really it's really quite insidious what's happened to our nation. The government just keeps interfering, thinking that they can, fix things by moving things around, but all they're doing is deindustrializing and destroying our nation. Our absolute highest priority is cheap electricity, and we've just been pursuing a path that has been absolutely detrimental to every aspect of our nation. We're seeing, you can watch the electricity being transferred throughout the states. You're seeing it being sucked from everywhere now, because states at times don't generate enough power for themselves. So we're in an absolute mess. And it's all a result of the government thinking that they can stick their hands into all these different aspects and pull strings and intervene. It's called interventionism. It's socialism. We need to get the government out.
And I think that's the interesting thing with Jim. I sort of come across Jim basically from property rights, but then also from the reckless renewable sort of campaign.
Yes.
And we have a very bad problem in this country in regards to there's just this continuous line that wind and solar are the cheapest form of generation. Now, technically, that is true, right? The generation. But the thing is, when you want to convert it to a baseload power system, what you have to do, and especially when you've got to provide the electricity baseload power for a fairly reasonable country. The Eastern Seaboard needs about 40 gigawatts of power. Now, that was supplied by about nearly 40 different power generators in coal, but of all different sizes across the states and Queensland, South Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales over the period. Then, of course, when we started to sign up, and this goes back to Mr. Johnny Howard. I mean, the Liberals have got their fingers in this pie as much as anyone else. But Johnny Howard was the first one to sign up to basically Kyoto. Then let us move on to those other pace, and then of course we got Rudd and that.
Yep.
But the separation between the CPI and the electricity price index basically started to change dramatically in 2007 once the Rudd government came up, signed up to I think it was Kyoto, and then later on Copenhagen and things like that. And we used to have an electricity price index which was way below the CPI. And what that did is pull down the CPI. It kept it under control. Then as soon as we got to 2007, and we sort of committed to full-heartedly with Mr. Rudd and that to renewable energy targets and things like that, the electricity price index started to go above the price index, consumer price index, and started to be an upwards influence on that. And that's continued right through. The only time when it plateaued out was the short time that Abbott was in, and he actually turned off the money to the renewables and that. But of course, it was reinstated with that. So,
you know how much we spent
as a system, it's not the cheapest form of electricity, and it never will be, and it'll never be reliable. It will always need the backup. And the other things that people don't, and this is where I think the people who should be fighting it a bit more don't articulate. You have to build what they're planning to build for a 40 gigawatt baseload system. They're planning to install 270 gigawatts of solar and wind power. You got to put in, what's that? That's nearly 4 times, 5 times, 6 times what your baseload power is. That's just in generators, and that's before you hook it up. So
before you hook it up and you put all the transmission lines in,
and then you still got to back it up. So this is a big problem. They get away with that line. It's the cheapest form of generation, but it's not the cheapest not power system. And it does no good to our grid. It damages our grid basically all the time because it's got to be balanced in that. So there's plenty of scope there.
But even just this is such a key issue to regional Queensland because our regional communities are unrenewable. And what we're seeing with these installation of these wind turbines, some communities are glowing red at nighttime because they all got to have this red flashing light. The Great Dividing Range, there's not enough wind down at sea level, so we've got to install all these wind turbines across the top of the Great Dividing Range, and we're talking, these are 300 meters long. They're way up in the sky, enormous. You need massive roadways up the mountains. We are destroying so much of our fauna and flora that it'll never come back. It's such a tragedy what we're doing, and the reality is because it's all regional, those in the city pushing it all, they never experience it, they never see it, and they never get out there to see what it's like and listen to the actual people, as me and Jim have been.
They can bulldoze a 70-meter wide track to
Mm.
access for these wind turbines on the top of our like I say, the Great Dividing Range. Not a problem. Not a problem with the environment and approvals and things like that. But if Farmer Jim wants to go and cut down a sapling on his property
Yeah.
because it's trying, because regrowth is a big problem on a lot of grazing property. Because once you get regrowth, if you can't remove it, it becomes
Yeah.
basically a no man's land for your cattle. They can't
Yep.
get through to, and it takes up valuable grazing land and that.
Hmm.
And so it should always be managed. And that same goes for our forests. Our forests should be managed. They shouldn't just left to their own devices that one day they'll just get around and burn or something like that. But we'll never harvest any wood. So there's a lot of things out there that you can be very different on. But
Hmm.
what do you think going to this election is the one thing or two things that you need to put yourself out there in front so you can be clearly identifiable from others?
Yeah, look. I think foundationally for our democracy, free speech, the ability to communicate without fear, right? Because fear enough will stifle democracy. So the Libertarians definitely want free speech enshrined in our Constitution. We're seeing the government continually try and strip that away. It came with the misinformation bill, which thank goodness we were able to stop. But now we've seen the under 16 social media ban come through. That's not designed to protect the children. Because remember, all of the adults will have to go through the facial recognition and the age verification to prove that we're adults. It's us who will be registering ourselves with some sort of digital ID. And then that will attach to your social media. I mean, it's just a very dangerous can of worms that we're opening. So when it comes to any sort of restriction on expression or free speech, we are absolutely dead against. And then secondly, I mean, you've got a cost of government crisis, which is fueled from so many aspects, whether it be, well, we're in a per capita recession. The only reason we're not in a true recession is because of the
Ponzi
outrageous
scheme,
immigration. Sorry.
the Ponzi scheme, the
Yeah,
migration Ponzi scheme.
yeah. It's because we take GDP as a whole, right, for the country rather than per capita. So if we just keep bringing more people in here who are going to keep spending, well, obviously the GDP might go up a tiny bit. 0.6% was the last number I saw. So that has to be stopped. The deficit spending, we're about to hit $1 trillion in debt. That will be for a population of 25 million, every man, woman, and child paying 1,600 just to cover the interest, including the non-taxpayers. What we're doing is we're reaping the benefits now and then saying, hey, future generations of Australians, you can pay all this debt. It's so short-sighted. I'm 29, right? My children, how are they going to buy a property if we just keep printing money and inflating prices? If we keep bringing more people in here, because supply and demand, that's a real thing. You bring in more demand and less supply, the prices go up. It's really quite simple, the struggles that we're facing, but they love to manipulate and change words and distract and so forth and obfuscate. So I think those are three real big issues that we're focused on. And just look, getting the government. Oh, look, getting the government. There's so much getting the government out of our lives. How dare we shut down access to public land because of the color of your skin? Right? Not on. This is Australia. We're all equal. We're all one people. We should have full access to all of our public land, all of our wonderful mountain walks, whether it be the Glass House Mountains. I know they're trying to shut down now, and me and Jim have got to go do a hike up that and make a stand for it. It's really shameful what's happening. So we want to bring back common sense. I mean, and as well, get rid of all the gender stuff in the schools. Children need to be focused on actually getting the skill set to survive in the real world. They don't need to be thinking about what gender they are. I feel ridiculous saying that, but parents have been telling me that in some public schools there are litter trays in the toilets, like cat litter trays for the
They're furries.
yeah. I can't believe we've gotten to this point. It's so disgraceful. So all of this nonsense has to end. And you know where that comes from? It comes from the Federal Department of Education, who are pushing through all of these ideologies
Because
that just
it's not the Federal Department of Education, it's the Federal Department of Ideology.
yeah, spot on.
That's what
Spot
it
on.
really is.
Yeah.
But I And I think probably this is one of the problems with Dutton's got in going into the election. If he seems to be picking up on things that won Trump the election, like there are only two sexes, right? Males and females. No, end of story. You don't have to say anything more than that. But A, I don't think he's game to say that, and I think there's very few people it's just a biological fact, but we seem to not be able to mouth those words or something, and the way it's going, our restrictions on free speech will stop us from actually saying that if we keep going down this track, because
That's
it will
right.
be considered hate speech. So if I get up here and say, well, there's only two genders, male and female, someone's going to be offended and I'm going to be hauled off to court or something like that. That's the problem. I mean, that's where I mean, with the free speech, we definitely need a referendum to get
Yeah.
it put into the Constitution.
And we have those hate crime laws already
Mm.
now. It's so scary. They've changed the definition so that if my language is determined to be reckless and I offend somebody from a particular group, it may not even be directed at them. I can be sentenced with mandatory sentencing from 1 year to 7 years for reckless language where I may not have even had the intention. It is insane what they've allowed to happen to our nation. I mean, as I think it was the Premier of New South Wales said, there's no free speech in a multicultural society. No, no, that free speech is fundamental to our society, and we will fight for that. That is the hill to die on.
Definitely. So, going into the campaign, do you think there's some slogans you should be linked up with, or because the trouble is going into a campaign, if you get into a situation where you've got to describe to your your policy to an nth degree,
Yep.
people stop listening to you after the second sentence.
Yep.
If you haven't got them engaged in those two sentences, and you can stop there because you've said the key points, they're just disengaged.
So
And
maybe, we're about letting you make your own decisions to live your life how you wish to live for you and your family. Family, freedom, prosperity. It all starts with the family. That's what we want to support. And we just want to let you live life by your own design.
okay, in regards to branch building,
Mm-hmm.
how do you see that progressing? And because I know the Liberal Democrats have been out there in New South Wales and Victoria for some times, really as the Libertarians and the Liberal Democrats call that, not long timers in Queensland.
That's
Uh,
right.
how do you think you are progressing with that branch building, and how do you see it going forward? And have you got enough of the right people in the areas to sort of build up those branches? Because that's what's essential. If to get you
I know.
you might be looking at this election now, but the thing is between now and the next election, and Queensland, we won't be having a state election until 28.
Mm-hmm.
Federal election will probably be in the same year anyway. So there's 3 years of basically inactivity, but you can't afford to be inactive for 3 years and then pop up again. So
Yep.
what's
I,
the plan in regards to um, getting those branches established?
well, I already feel like I've been running in this campaign for 14 months now. From the day I joined, I've been on social media and wherever I can, even at the branch meetings, to create that awareness. So hopefully we're setting the example right now. But look, I think we're doing really well. In Brisbane, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 branches. Now we've got one in Gladstone. We've got a new one opening up in Bundaberg. For the regions like Cairns, Townsville, where we don't have enough people, we have an online virtual meeting, virtual branch meeting. So that's not going to stop. That's only ramping up, because the reality is the tougher that it gets, the more that people struggle, the more that does work in our favor, the more that normal people who are not necessarily politically engaged will start looking for other options, and we will be there ready to embrace them because we're setting up the foundations. So look, I'm very optimistic. I think we're doing really well on that front.
in regards to engaging with the other miners and that, and I mean, Uncle Clive's, I find him a person who is a disruptor rather than a
Yes.
benefit to the election cycle.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
he just comes and goes. He's not interested in establishing any
Well,
branches. He hopes to get one or two
look,
people in maybe somewhere along the line, but he doesn't get much return on his money. I mean,
no.
I think if I think the last federal election he burned up something like $60 million, and
Hmm.
oh, gee, wouldn't we like a chance at having a party that could
I
invest
know. I know.
invest $60 million in building the party, not just blowing it on an election.
Look, that's what disappointed me so much. What happened to UAP after 2022? It disappeared and then it lost registration because Clive Palmer didn't do the work. Come on. That was very disappointing. And then he launches a new party, Trumpet of Patriots. I I know, look, he's still making more awareness and moving the dial in the right direction. I'm always grateful of that, but I don't think he has a great amount of awareness of where the issues are as well, because he wants one of his policies is free education, free university. The universities are the indoctrination centers right now. We do not want to make that any more accessible than it already is. Um, so he's got some very socialist policies that I don't think are fully thought out, and I don't know. I Trumpet of Patriots is pretty corny to me as well. I'll be honest.
Well,
I
it's interesting if because he only got to the Trumpet of Patriots because he tried to buy Pauline Hanson One Nation. He offered
yeah,
her, I believe, he offered her $10 million to
that's what I heard.
hand over the party, and
Yep.
she wouldn't come to the party. And I mean, oh well, that's her bad luck. But the Trumpet of Patriots, they were actually the Federation Party before
They
that.
were. Yeah.
Glenn O'Rourke, I don't know if you know him, but I've dealt with him for a few years when he was
Hmm.
trying to build up the Federation Party. They actually have a few branches, and their basic roots comes from the old Family First. If you go back to the
Oh
Family
yeah.
First
Okay.
of the 90s,
Yep.
so that they're around in those sort of days, and Glenn's been with it. The interesting thing is when Clive basically bought Trumpet of Patriots and did the deal, um,
Yep.
they they at least kept the executive in their hands. I think the bulk of the executive is still Glenn O'Rourke and his people, sort of thing, and
Okay.
and their intention is to keep building branches and things like that. And but like you say, it's an off-putting name to me, But anyway, I think
Yeah.
I was happy with the Federation Party.
Yeah. I
Because
prefer that.
that suited me because I believe in the Constitution
Me
and the
too.
Federation working as it
Yep.
should. So,
Exactly.
but if Clive had to come earlier, because I think the approval for the name only came through this year.
Mm.
So yeah, if he had to come through looking for something earlier, he might be using running the Federation Party, but it is what it is.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
in regards to your campaign sort of thing in the difference, you'll only have a few seats. Um, so what sort of effort and what sort of more noticeable? I know Campbell Newman's the media person or spokesperson for the Libertarians, um, but thing with Campbell, he's a sort of very polarising figure. So, is it going to be just the members or themselves, or is there a few prominent people, maybe from interstate or that, or might come up and sort of campaign or speak as well? Because you do have John Ruddock. He's he speaks very well. He's
He does.
at least he got invited to Millet's inauguration in
Yeah.
Albertina, which is
Yep.
quite good. He speaks well. He's fairly entertaining as well. So, um, what sort of campaign you think you got for the next? Well, you only got 4 weeks left now, basically. 4 weeks and 2 days.
Yeah. Well, look, every state is running their own campaign, right? So Ruddock is probably best suited down there behind Craig Kelly down in New South Wales, and everyone's on their own crusade. Jim and myself, as you know, as you said at the beginning, we're doing a bit more of a tour up to Cairns, the Atherland, Tablelands, Townsville, and then we'll be back down in Brisbane to spend most of the time. I have every intention to drown the internet in some videos that I've been professionally recording on our policies that'll be going live in the next couple of days. Because a lot of our work, it is being done through social media. Now, if those follow me on X will know that I'm quite active. But we really control X. The amount of just volunteers that are engaging and promoting and sharing content is really inspiring, and that's, I guess, a lot of that is what makes me very passionate about this, because I can see there is such a grassroots movement. And so, I mean, you're saying about, well, who has some clout that could come and speak for us? There probably isn't really a particular person who could do that. I mean, we truly are a community growing movement. And it is only from me and Jim just getting out there in the local communities that we're getting some breakthrough into the mainstream media. I mean, I was supposed to do an interview with 9 News. I was at Kangaroo Point. I was with the cameraman. 20 minutes before going live, he gets the phone call. We're not allowed to put you on, is basically the reason. So they shut that
We're
down.
not allowed to put.
That's really why, because they said, "Oh, we'll call you back." Yeah,
But
right.
here's an interesting thing in regards to the media that we look on at the moment,
Mm.
and also access to X and Facebook. But you've also got a lot of people, like I did a show with the pig hunters,
Yeah.
um,
Yep.
and the interesting thing about that is we had a good talk before, because it was basically, it wasn't just about pig hunting, it was about access to parks and that.
Yeah.
And it's quite surprising how many of those groups are hooked into each other, like the four-wheel drivers, the
Yeah.
people who
Well.
hunt,
Yep.
the people who just want to go out walking, camping,
Yep.
and all that sort of thing. And so what happened with that? That episode just went out to about 15,000 people in a couple of days,
Hmm.
because all those people were interconnected, because that was their subject. They wanted to preserve access to public land for
Yes.
different reasons, admittedly, but the common
Equally
theme was
important.
we want access to public land.
Hmm. Jim,
So
I believe, is quite close with a few of those groups.
yeah,
I've asked if I could
so
go pig hunting with them.
yeah, but and then there's also the fishermen as well. They've been hard done by,
Yeah.
so they've got a good
Everybody.
network.
Everyone who
They
wants
just
to
go
live a
swoop.
normal life.
Yeah, so I think that they're probably the keys to get out there on that grassroots level. And the other thing that they do, much more than anything else, is they jibber amongst themselves, their families,
Yep.
and their colleagues and that. And so if you can get that word of mouth sort of thing,
Yeah.
that is gold as well.
It will
So
forever be the most effective form of marketing, word of mouth.
okay, look, well, we've gone over the hour. Maybe if you just want to wind up and send your commiserations and get well to Jim,
Yeah.
and
So
hope
sorry.
he's ready
Yeah,
for Monday's trip.
that's right.
We'll do that, and then I'll introduce next week's show, and then we'll have a chat offline. So
Sure.
if you'd just like to finish up on just uh, rounding off everything for yourself.
Well, yeah. Well, Bill, thank you for having me online. I hope I've been able to give your audience some perspective of what the Libertarians stand for. But look, it really is to restore traditional Australia. It's common sense, it's bottom-up politics, engaging with the community, fighting with the community, holding the politicians and the bureaucrats who are the real problem accountable. Those who think that they can tell you what to do shouldn't be. We want to let you, as an adult, as an Australian, make your own decisions to live your own life by your own choices. And that starts with getting the government out of our lives. So, yeah, it's been a pleasure.
I think one of the clever things is it's a cost of government crisis rather than a
It
cost of
is.
living.
Well,
I think that's a clever line to sort of belt out there.
yeah,
Okay, if you just hold on the line, I'll just introduce next week's show, and then I'll have a quick chat offline. And thanks again for your time, Lachlan.
pleasure.
If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Joining me next week will be Stuart Bocking from Coal Australia, and we'll be having a few discussions in regards to the coal industry, its value to Australia, and the fact that it is now standing up on its own 2 feet as an organisation, rather than being in the background of, say, the Queensland Resources Council. And that's only happened in the last 9 months. And we'll talk to Stuart in regards to how far they've come, have creating a voice for the coal industry. So join me next week. Thank you.